And I just want to read to you a small little paragraph of the People's Agreement, which was submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was unequivocal in outlining the cause for this. Capitalism is the problem because it has imposed on us a logic of competition, progress, and limitless growth. The regime of production and consumption seeks profit without limits, separating human beings from nature and imposing a logic of domination upon nature, transforming everything into commodities, including life itself. I don't think you heard any of that kind of discussion in Copenhagen. That was really the centerpiece and the theme of everything that went around in Cochabamba. As a participant in the summit, I took from it a clear message. Global warming is not just an environmental concern. To save the planet from climate change, the climate movement must also stand for radical social change and participatory grassroots democracy that is taking place in countries like Bolivia and Latin America. Cochabamba, for me, has reinforced the need for solidarity with the revolutionary movements in those countries, Latin America, and the indigenous movements of Canada and the world, which are, let's be clear, under attack from US imperialism. A setback for any of these progressive movements in Latin America and the struggles of the indigenous people is not only is also a setback for the climate justice movement too. We must unite in the struggle and internationalize the struggle. Thank you.
Now we're going to invite the Red Slam Collective to come up. Red Slam is a collective of indigenous, multidisciplinary performers whose poetic song stories infused with hip-hop, powwow, reggae, and drum talk. A variety of themes are expressed in the pieces, but the underlying goal is to uplift, self-identify, and promote unity through spoken lyricism which arranges meaning. Please welcome the Red Slam Collective.
Volcanic rage, she got a cycle, a tsunami and a hurricane.
She is Iranian-Canadian living here in Toronto. She was part of the Canadian Youth Delegation in Copenhagen and is currently the G20 and climate organizer, for the Canadian Youth Climate Coalition, Getting Climate Justice. Getting Climate Justice youth organizers across Canada mobilized towards the G8 and G20. She was also a founding member of Rainforest Action Network's Toronto chapter, running the Freedom from Oil campaign that is targeting RBC as the top financier of the tar sands. So, Kimia, could you come up?
Coming up here for moral support and vice versa. Hi everyone. So first I just wanted to thank the Toronto Bolivia Solidarity Network for giving us this opportunity to report back. I almost need to do that. And to help me make my way to Bolivia. I'm so grateful. I wanted to thank OPERT Toronto, Vincent from the Toronto Climate Campaign, IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and other friends. Thank you so much. So basically, I've been doing climate justice organizing for the past year. Hasn't been that long, so I'm a newbie. Both here in Toronto and doing stuff on a national and international level as well. And we've really had our hands full with the Canadian government, who's not willing to do their part in addressing climate change and the tar sands. We've had our hands full in just trying to build the movement in general and doing capacity building for organizers. So for the climate justice movement here, for a lot of us, we felt really disconnected from what's happening on a global level. So I really wanted to go to Cochabamba more to just listen, to learn, to hear from people on the front lines of the movement, to have a better understanding of what are the real and just solutions that we need to address the climate crisis. And I'm really excited to be able to bring home these insights to share with our growing climate youth movement. So what I walked away with from Cochabamba is a lot more than I expected. Cochabamba was an important reminder that real change comes from the ground up and from those on the front lines of a struggle. While I was there, I started to question whether the way that we frame issues and solutions as a movement here in Canada are only helping to validate existing global systems that have created the climate crisis. First off, are we talking about climate debt or about climate aid? It says in the People's Declaration that I encourage everybody to read, it's amazing, it came out of Cochabamba. It says, developed countries, in assuming their historical responsibility, must recognize and honor their climate debt in all of its dimensions as the basis for a just, effective, and scientific solution to climate change, end quote. When we talk about climate justice in a global context here in Canada, we talk about providing adequate support to developing countries so they can effectively address the impacts of climate change. But what we haven't done is frame this as Canada's debt to climate-affected communities. Canada is indebted to the Global South for not only causing climate change, but by wasting precious time since ratifying the Kyoto Protocol, and as a result, increasing our emissions by around 34%. Climate financing should not be seen as an altruistic effort on the part of developed countries, but as their responsibility, their debt that must be paid to developing countries left with limited resources and atmospheric space to develop. Countries should not be begging for what they are owed. Another takeaway was around the rights of Mother Earth. The world's peoples, represented in Cochabamba with the leadership of Indigenous people, created a declaration on the rights of Mother Earth that outlines the inherent rights of Mother Earth and our obligations as human beings to it. The first line of the Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth reads, "We are all part of Mother Earth, an indivisible, living community of interrelated and interdependent beings with a common destiny. And we gratefully acknowledge that Mother Earth is the source of life, nourishment, and learning, and provides everything we need to live well." In the industrialized world, we have come to view the water, air, and land around us as things to be commodified and owned. How often do we talk about the intrinsic value and rights of nature, even in the environmental movement? Going into the conference, I'll admit, I didn't feel like discussion of the rights of Mother Earth was relevant to me. I think I've been disconnected from my land for way too long, living in urban centers. I didn't really know if a discussion on the rights of Mother Earth was even, I didn't even really understand how such a declaration could help stop climate change. But after listening to people who have a close relationship to their lands, I came to see things through a different lens. I came to see the incredible danger in the industrialized world and that we can't even comprehend the notion that the earth has rights. In fact, in today's legal system, nature has no inherent rights, but is rather considered the property of individuals and institutions. If nature is not seen to have its own rights that must be upheld, then human civilization will continue to exploit it for our own means and will just fall further down the rabbit hole of the climate crisis. What was discussed in Cochabamba in the Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth that emerged is the idea of a complete transformation of systems, structures, and our understanding of our relationship to the earth. And this is something really groundbreaking. It puts a new frame on how we discuss impacts and solutions to solving the climate crisis. Reparations are due not only to affected communities, but to Mother Earth itself. Finally, what about accountability? As a people, we have watched global emissions rise by 11% since 1990, even with the Kyoto Protocol in place. In this same period, we have seen the exacerbated poverty, illness, death, and displacement of people losing their homes from climate change. All this with no penalization for governments, companies, and financial institutions who have continued business as usual with the climate crisis looming. The ruthless expansion of the tar sands are a great example. But while the scale of this expansion is the largest and most destructive in the world, I heard story after story in Cochabamba of people's local struggles against similarly destructive mining companies. And you can hear a lot of those stories at the Mining and Justice Conference. Affected communities are ready to hold those accountable who have broken their commitments under the Kyoto Protocol, violating their human rights and the rights of Mother Earth. They want to take matters in their own hands to combat the lack of accountability that we've seen within the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The people want an international climate justice tribunal that, as stated in the declaration, I quote, has the legal capacity to prevent, judge, and penalize states, industries, and people that by commission or omission contaminate and provoke climate change, end quote. With the tribunal in place, Canadians could take our government to court for failing to meet its climate commitments under Kyoto. Woohoo! Again, this is another example of the global South and Indigenous people seeking real solutions to flawed systems that have facilitated unfettered capitalism, globalization, and industrialization. They know that if we put our trust in the same systems and ideologies that got us into this mess, then we'll never get ourselves out. Another key takeaway from Cochabamba has been the distinction between false and real solutions for climate justice. False solutions are those that encourage business as usual, where maximizing profit is the bottom line, even in solving climate change. While real solutions focus on systems change, a complete transformation in the way we work, we live, produce and consume, and how we interact with one another and nature. False solutions ensure continued growth for big business, while real solutions seek to change the global power dynamics that have colonized people, the earth, and now our atmosphere. False solutions are voluntary, while real solutions are legally binding. False solutions tackle climate change as a one-dimensional problem, a rise in temperature, while real solutions seek to fix the root of the problem, what caused climate change in the first place, and that is the cumulative effect of an inherently flawed capitalist system. So I recognize that here in the Global South, we often don't talk about ending capitalism as we know it. In fact, maybe you're considered radical or crazy or an idealist to even bother thinking about changing a system so entrenched in our lives and so powerful. People want a goal they can achieve, they think they can achieve, and I understand that. But in Cochabamba, every single person was talking about capitalism because it's in their backyards, it's their sick family members, it's their contaminated lands, it's their displacement, it's their privatized waters, it's their hunger, it's their precarious jobs, it's their poverty. This is why, for the Global South, they understand that climate change and global injustice go hand in hand, and they can only be solved through systems change. When we speak of the urgency of climate change, the reality is that the climate crisis is still a future threat for the majority of Canadians, but it is a present crisis for millions of people around the world who are being disproportionately affected for a problem our pollution and our unsustainable development has caused. So any solutions that would further this human inequality and ecological destruction are false and they're unjust. Before Cochabamba, the idea of fighting capitalism did leave me feeling hopeless, that's for sure. But after Cochabamba, I know that another way is possible and necessary. The capitalist system is based on limitless growth, profits without limits, economies of scale, on the commodification of people and resources, on the abuse and exploitation of people and La Pachamama, Mother Earth. Making the vast changes that are necessary to combat climate change before it's too late are impossible under this system. So the world's people are calling for change. They're calling for an end to a long and devastating history of capitalism and the start of a new path towards harmony, dignity, and human and ecological well-being. What I saw in Cochabamba was a strong and confident global resistance that is quickly growing, a resistance to the world's greatest polluters who refuse to accept the responsibility for causing this global catastrophe. And this movement is building. It's becoming more tactful, more united, and more committed. So what does this mean for the climate justice movement in Canada? And how can we align ourselves with what's happening on a global level? On this past Wednesday, the Climate Change Accountability Act passed its third reading in the House, and this was an amazing victory. But the hard work comes in how Canada will achieve these targets. A friend told me last week that each small victory we have within our movement should be one step closer to transforming the overarching systems we wish to change. Each victory should be one step closer to the paradigm shifts that we all envision. So if we are committed to climate justice, then we are committing ourselves to challenging current global systems that continue to exploit, to oppress, and to kill. If we are committed to climate justice, then we are committed to standing in solidarity with communities on the front lines of this struggle. If we're committed to climate justice, we're committed to spreading the real solutions like those articulated in the People's Declaration with our families, our peers, our communities, and our politicians. Moving forward, we have to question how each and every one of our actions and strategies as a movement are part of a bigger aim of restructuring our relationships, our jobs, our economy, and our production and consumption of goods. Because the world has spoken in Cochabamba, and it's up to us to heed the call. The Declaration says, humanity confronts a great dilemma: to continue on the path of capitalism, depredation, and death, or to choose the path of harmony with nature and respect for life. I think that everyone here is ready for a new path, but are willing and ready to fight for it. Thank you.
All right. Well, Ben's up here already. But he's our next speaker. Ben Powless is Mohawk from Six Nations in Ontario. He's currently studying human rights, Indigenous and Environmental Studies at Carleton University in Ottawa. And he's been involved with the Canadian Youth Climate Coalition since its inception, working at both the local and national level. He's also heavily involved with the Indigenous Environmental Network. He sits on the board of the National Council for the Canadian Environmental Network and is on the Youth Advisory Group to the Canadian Commission for UNESCO, and is very involved in the local Aboriginal community. So he was also in Cochabamba and in Copenhagen. Thanks, Ben.
Sego, Skanagoa. My name is Ben Powless, as mentioned, Mohawk from the Wolf Clan, Six Nations territory, an hour and a bit west of here in Toronto. And so I want to say thank you again to the organizers and everybody else for showing up here, as well for Kimia for providing an excellent overview, which really gets into the heart of what was dealt with in Cochabamba. But I want to start off with a little bit of a discussion of how I actually got to Cochabamba, because I think that actually has a lot to do with what was being discussed within just the meeting halls and negotiation rooms there. Because I started off my trip to Cochabamba actually in Peru, in the Amazon. I was returning to the Amazon after almost a year of being away from there. I had worked in June of last year with a number of communities in the northern part of Peru, the Peruvian Amazon, after there was political violence, really a massacre that left over 33 people dead there last year. This was June 5th of 2009, around a place called Bagua in the Peruvian Amazon. And I just happened to be in Lima that day when my flight got cancelled, and ended up being able to travel to Bagua shortly afterwards. And ended up working with some of the communities for a little while, documenting some of the things that went on there. And what we basically found out, and what was made evident to us, was that the reason that people had been killed was that the military had been sent in by the federal government, by the central government. They sent in the special forces to repress this basically peaceful protest, which has been going on for 60 days in the Amazon, by the Amazonian, Nawahun and Wampi peoples, who were opposed to a free trade agreement that had been signed between Peru, Canada, as well as the United States, which the main intent of this free trade agreement was to open up the Amazon and other parts of Peru as well to foreign oil and mining interests. It was, of course, a huge issue at the time, and it currently is a huge issue. You can go into the Amazon, and the people who were there were telling us, we've seen the destruction and the desecration that's been caused by oil companies coming into our lands, in the past 50, 60 years. We know that history very well. There are communities in the Amazon where 98% of the people have toxic levels of cadmium in their blood. Other communities where 66% of the children have toxic levels of mercury in their blood, and are being, many of them are being born with deformities and don't survive their childhood as a result of which. These are communities all over the Amazon that are suffering through the same impacts. And here in this, very northern part of the Peruvian Amazon, these communities had decided to stand up and say that they were not going to allow these kind of laws to come in and open up the Peruvian Amazon to exploitation. And so we came back after almost a year. I was down there actually at the same time as my colleague Susanna here. And what we found out was that there's been almost no change in the Peruvian government. There's been no change in any of the laws systems that led to these original protests. A lot of the communities are dealing with the same thing. And now they've suffered through the loss of a number of their community members. Hundreds of people were sent to jail. Hundreds of others had to go to the hospital to receive treatment. Others couldn't go to the hospital. And so we went back to basically find out how these communities were doing, only to discover that now the greatest threat to these communities around Bagua that we were working with was actually a Canadian mining company called Durato Resources, a gold mining company based out of British Columbia. And the communities were very, very concerned that this gold mining company was going to come in, as so many had before, and desecrate the water systems. This is the exact place where they want to operate is called the Condor Mountains, and it's actually one of the sacred headwaters of the Amazon for this community. It's one of the most sacred places on the earth, and this is exactly where this Durato Resources company wants to go in and take out the gold mine. And so for them, they made very clear that again, this is for them really a life or death situation, that they're ready to give their lives and ready to stand up and defend themselves again. And this course is very, I think, relevant and related to the exact purpose of the Cochabamba conference and its intent. But these communities were also looking for support from people here in Canada as well. That this mine is actually coming from Canada. They get their money from the Toronto Stock Exchange or the Vancouver Stock Exchange, and that's how they were able to go down and operate there. And I also encourage you. People can go to the mining conference and actually check out, Susanna is going to be talking a little bit about the case of Peru and Bagua and what this mine is going to do as well. So if you have the opportunity and you'd like to hear a lot more about what's going on there, I really encourage you to check that out. Moving on from Bagua, I had received an invitation to go down to another part of the Peruvian Amazon called Lamas, Barranquita, and that's the homeland of the Quichua people, not to be confused with the highland Quechua. These Quichua people have been fighting for the past number of years two different projects which are very much interrelated. One is a biofuel project headed by one of the largest corporations in Peru, and this has taken away about 10,000 acres of their land so far, all for the express purpose of turning it into monocrop. All for the Yeah. So this company had gone in there and taken away about 10,000 acres of this community's land to create a monocrop palm oil plantation, and of course they received a lot of support, a lot of the money to do this because they had been touting it as a so-called solution to climate change. They were creating biofuels, of course, to feed our cars. Meanwhile, these communities that live there, that depended upon this land, actually had lost out on the land, lost out on their basic ability to provide food for themselves in the long run. And a lot of the communities were concerned that because of the amount of chemicals, the pesticides, the herbicides, everything that is sprayed on these lands, the fact that they use up so much water, it was only going to lead to basically contaminating and polluting and drying up a lot of the water resources in this part of the Amazon, which also feeds in just a short way down the water streams into the Amazon, the main Amazon water system. The second part of the projects that they were facing off was actually a government-initiated natural protected area. And Peru has been doing a lot of these natural protected areas, again in the same sort of vein of saying we're very environmentally friendly country. We love the Amazon, we love the environment. But again, some of these protected areas have been placed on and over indigenous communities, and basically taking away the power of these indigenous communities to define and do their own kind of development, to have any sort of control over what happens to their lands, and in some cases kicking people out of their land. And so what they were saying is, again, how can these be environmentally friendly solutions? How can these be sustainable solutions in the long run? And what we were seeing was that these communities, some of which I had the opportunity to visit, which you have to take a boat going down a number of hours down the Amazon, are living in complete harmony. There's absolutely nothing that they're doing wrong to their natural environment, but at the same time they're the ones who are losing their rights at the same time for the Peruvian government's efforts to claim that they're doing environmentally friendly work. And especially in the case of the biofuel company, so that they can sell to an international market that's basically ripe for open up to these false solutions to climate change, and that is really threatening these communities' basic autonomy, basic rights of self-determination. And so, leaving Lamas, Peru, I had the chance to go by bus all the way up to La Paz and then on to Cochabamba, which was a 2-day-long bus ride I shared with Susanna as well. Really, really incredible though. And just so everybody knows, these photos and I've written a number of articles as well about the situation there. They're all available on rabble.ca. But we went and continued on to go and attend the conference with a lot of these understandings in our minds. And we arrived at the conference, and I was actually asked from the outset to support the Indigenous Peoples Caucus there. There was an Indigenous Peoples Working Group, one of 17 distinct working groups that were part of the conference, all of whom were tasked with dealing with different issues from adaptation to the Kyoto Protocol to climate debt to the rights of Mother Earth, and all of whom came up with their own distinct declarations, demands, understandings, analysis. They asked me to be part of this Indigenous Peoples Working Group and serve as one of the secretaries, and so we had the chance over the 4 days of the conference to really go into a lot of the issues in detail. And it was really incredible because we had the participation of hundreds of Indigenous people from mostly different parts of Latin America, all parts of South America, parts of North America, Asia, and Africa as well, came out to support us. It was really, really an incredible gathering, as well as a number of Indigenous peoples were really the dominant voices in a lot of the other working groups as well, which again, this is the first time that this has really ever happened besides a specific Indigenous gathering on climate change, which took place last year. But this one was really a chance to bring together different peoples and different movements all around the world. And so what happened out of the Indigenous Peoples Working Group in particular was some of those developments that were specifically mentioned, especially the discussion about the proposal of living well as opposed to living better, which again was a rejection of the capitalist sort of so-called system. What was also really interesting out of the Indigenous Peoples Working Group was that a number of the communities there said, you know, it's not even just a matter of capitalist systems at the outset. I mean, and some of them were coming from you know, so-called communist countries. A lot of them said, you know, it's even the same kind of problem exists in a lot of the socialist countries. The real problem is that there's no respect for Mother Earth. There's no respect for living in harmony with nature. And that these same kind of things, you know, can happen at the outset of any of these groups. And so there was an interesting sort of differentiation within the Indigenous Peoples Working Group, especially, that really recognized that, you know, the question at heart isn't the sort of economic model that we choose. It's really the way that we interact with each other, the way that we interact with Mother Earth. So I thought that was actually a really interesting development. Other specific ones that came out of the Indigenous Peoples Working Group suggested or put forward a right to water for all peoples on the planet, rejected the transnational corporations from operating in Indigenous territories, and there was also a rejection of, you know, a number of specific false solutions mechanisms which were impacting on a lot of Indigenous communities who came there to share their specific experiences. And so a number of them came there to share what was happening with them. Again, in terms of biofuels projects. In other cases, it was actually wind farms or dam projects that were going in place and then impacting on their communities without their consent and forcing them to lose access again to their lands and their territories. And so they were very concerned about these kind of projects going through. Other communities were very concerned about carbon offsetting projects, especially carbon offsetting forest projects, which is now one of the biggest debates taking place under the United Nations system. They're debating whether that, you know, developed countries like Canada can simply send money down to a country like Peru and pay them to, you know, so-called protect their forest, basically selling carbon offset credits to companies, you know, that operate out of Canada. Well, on the other hand, you know, Indigenous communities and a lot of other local populations in these countries are saying, well, no, these kind of projects are only going to lead to more displacements, lead to more loss of lands and loss of control of our territories. And they actually issued a very strong condemnation of this entire plan under the UN system and all sort of carbon offset projects. So that was, I think, really one of the most powerful sort of statements and actual consensus processes that we were able to arrive at. Outside of just the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, Kimia mentioned, and there was also mention of specifically the rights of Mother Earth and the Climate Justice Tribunal. And, you know, I think it's really a really powerful idea that, you know, not just something that they developed there, but that actually Bolivia has actually brought forward and issued a sort of resolution already to the United Nations to try and adopt this Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth and try and really push forward this International Climate Justice Tribunal. And if these kind of projects were able to go through, it would really represent a serious legal challenge to a lot of the companies and a lot of the countries around the world that are seeking to continue the processes of colonialism and capitalist exploitation in a lot of local communities around the world. There was also mention of the referendum, discussions on climate debt. They gave very specific numbers on terms of what they wanted to see in emissions, how they wanted to see adaptation funds spent. All these kind of really incredible developments that Kimia and others have gone over already. What was really really powerful about the movement was that this was not coming from a lot of people who had been participating before in the UN processes or participating in their own government processes. A lot of it was really led by grassroots movements from South America, and especially from Bolivia. They were the ones who were, in many cases, really the ones pushing a lot of these processes. And I think that it has to be recognized that this was the first attempt to have this kind of conversation, the first attempt to ever hold a conference of this nature. There was a lot of difficulties, of course, a lot of logistical problems that kept some people from participating in the first place. There was that volcano, which some people are calling related to climate change in Iceland, that kept a lot of participants from Europe and Asia, other parts of Africa as well, from actually arriving in the first place of Cochabamba. There are other problems of, we had, for example, in the Indigenous People Caucus, 200 people showed up, and we had a room set for 60 people. Very popular working group, and so it took us basically 2 days to find a room that was big enough to hold everybody. And when we got there, there was no audio systems, we had no translators, so you can just imagine the stress and a lot of the work that we were under. But to actually come up with these declarations, and you can also imagine how much more powerful and impactful it would have been to have a lot more of the representatives who were supposed to be there from other parts of the world, and to have all these processes really run as smoothly as they were supposed to. The other major issue was that there was very little media coverage that came out of this conference, particularly from northern media. The only thing they actually covered was a sort of just kind of thing that was taken out of context that Evo Morales said about having to watch the hormones in chickens being related to sort of sexual deviations in hormones among men, which the whole world took to understand him saying that eating chickens turns people gay. And there was he was basically ridiculed on an international level as a result of which. But on the flip side, none of the international media then I think really took the conference seriously, which is a great misstep and a great sort of loss for the international climate justice movement. So I think that it's really incredible to actually see so many people here at this kind of event who are actually able to and interested in taking that message back and actually interested in finding out what truly happened. And like Kimia said, I encourage everybody to take a look on the actual website of the conference and take a look, if nothing else, at the final declaration that was issued, because the final declaration actually contains the key sections out of every single working group, sort of synthesized into like maybe a 10-page document as well. But as I was saying, this is really, we have to really think of this as just a starting conversation point. This is not the last conference. There was a call made for a second conference to be organized in 2011 after the Cancun Climate Change Conference. And I really hope that a lot more movements and a lot more peoples and groups from the global north will be able to travel down and show and express their solidarity with the voices and peoples of the south. And hopefully, we'll be able to resolve a lot of these challenges in terms of translation, in terms of logistics by that point. But the real challenge now here in Canada, as Kimia was laying out as well, is how do we get people here mobilized? How do we get them interested and understand the importance of what happened in Bolivia, the importance of understanding and respecting the voices of the people in Global South? How do we actually make sure that these kind of violations of people's rights, violations against our Mother Earth, are not able to continue, especially as being called solutions to climate change, especially being called and receiving money, to protect the planet, at the same time violating, the very sacredness of a lot of our peoples and a lot of Mother Earth around the world. So that's one of the prime solutions, and I really think that the mobilization that we have, especially here in Toronto, up into the G8 and G20 conference as well, this kind of the results of the Cochabamba conference really have to be taken into consideration, and should be something that forms, the basis of some of the conversations, the starting point of some of the conversations. And as we try and figure out, how they can be translated into a Canadian context, into a Toronto context, into an Ontario context, into a Canadian First Nations context as well. This is really the challenge, I think, that lies ahead of us right now, and really I think that's where the starting point of this sort of conversation tonight really begins. And it really gives us a chance to conceive of how, in Canada we can go about changing these systems, and really starting this conversation understanding that climate change is just a way to talk about a lot of deep structural issues that are inherent and that are problematic in our economy, in our political system, in our social system, that really have to be dealt with as a fundamental. And so with that, I want to just say that for me it was really an honor to be able to go and travel and participate in Cochabamba, to be able to support the Indigenous Peoples Caucus there and all of the peoples who came out from around the world to participate, as well as to be here in front of you, and almost specifically to be preceding two very honored and respected Indigenous leaders here in Canada as well. And so with that, I'd like to give them the word as well. Thank you.